because ultimately the U.S. government controls their security. So it's kind of it's a catch-22 really for Europe, because in one sense, you certainly want to have the United States guaranteeing your security, but as a result, you do give up your freedom because you're going to have to basically fall in line and do whatever the United States government says, which has now put Europe in a very difficult spot.
One has to ask, why would we want to put Europe in a difficult spot? This war could absolutely have been avoided. There was every chance in the world. I wrote about this starting 7 months before the war. I kept writing over and over about how we're getting closer and closer, and Russia means what it says, and it is willing to use force if we keep pushing ahead in this. There was never any reason to keep pushing NATO further and further toward their border. Russia can't make good on it. There's no threat from Russia. It's not the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, which had 50,000 tanks and nuclear weapons and thousands of fighters. This is not the same threat, so it's not needed. But we kept going forward anyway, and now we have the war that we should have been able to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, let's shift topics here, because we're talking about the war that we should have been able to avoid. Recently, you and John Mearsheimer were on a debate team, and you were debating at the Council on Foreign Relations. And I think this was an interesting one, because the debate topic was, should the United States continue to fund this war? Obviously, you and Mearsheimer took the stance that the United States should not continue funding this war. Tell me a little bit about that experience and, how that debate went and how that entire thing went down.
Well, first of all, it was a real treat and pleasure to get to debate alongside John Mearsheimer, who's, as you pointed out, going back to 2015, and actually he wrote some stuff even earlier than that, predicting many years before that, predicting that there was a risk of war with Russia even before the events of the Maidan in the 2014, etc. So it was a real pleasure to get to stand alongside of him because of his track record. And I actually didn't know until then that he was a former Army guy, a West Point grad. I thought he was just a brilliant professor. So nice. That was interesting by itself. But once we got on the stage, the one thing that really stood out to both of us was that all of our arguments are based on a ground truth assessment of what's reality, what's true on the ground. And aside from whatever people say, the other side's argument was all about emotions and headlines. And in fact, when we tried to steer the argument into facts and counting things and tanks and bullets and manpower and all those things, they did not defend their position based on that. So here's the key thing that anyone on that's debating this issue has to understand. If you want to argue that we should keep funding Ukraine, if you want to argue that we should keep supporting them into the future, 10 years like Zelensky wants, you've got to be able to show tangibly on the ground where all of the Russian advantages I've mentioned can be overcome. Because if you can't overcome their manpower, their industrial capacity, their bombing force, their air defense, and their air power, if you can't neutralize all those and show a very graphic physical path, then you cannot support this, because it defies common sense and reality that they can't win if you can't do that. And there is no such path, and nor do they try to make that argument. They use this stuff that, democracy, we're defending democracy, and, it's unjust what happened to them. And it is. They were invaded. It was unjust. I agree with that. But those things don't matter, because war doesn't care about morality. War doesn't care about what's right and wrong. It cares about who's got more bullets, bombs, and bodies than the other side. That's what it cares about. So if you care about the people, then you want to bring that war to an end as soon as possible to preserve as much land as possible, much freedom as possible, and drop the killing to the people you care about. And we're not doing any of those. Yeah,
I mean, that's a very common sense point there, Danny. I mean, war does not care about your feelings. It's a fact, right? It's who has more. When you have President Zelensky admitting, look, we're at a 10-1 deficit right now. We're 1, they're 10 as far as artillery. In addition, we have no more men to serve. I mean, when you're looking at the cold, hard facts, you have to make a very blunt and honest assessment on what's happening. And I salute you guys for doing that, because, even on this YouTube channel, sometimes people will say, hey, you're taking the Russian talking points. And I say, no, what I do is I contact brilliant minds like yourself, Mearsheimer. I want to get these insights from people that just simply look at the facts of the situation. And, just because we're analyzing it and saying, look, a Russian victory seems imminent, it's just more from looking at it from a military strategist mindset. Let's look at the facts of the situation and see what is logistically going to happen. When you're down 10-1, when that new aid package passes, but yet half of it is still going to be sent to the military industrial complex in the United States, basically just replacing all the weapons that we've sent over, it doesn't look good. And I love your point there saying that, look, if we're going to support for 10 years, show me on paper at which point does it become where we can overtake Russia? Like where does the scales then tip in the opposite direction? They can't, and that's why I think the only counter debate really is one based on emotion. But, you cannot use emotion when you're talking about complex geopolitics and specifically war.
And, and I would add in there on the emotional argument, I also have one. And here it is. You want to talk about how we can't let Russia win. I hear that. I've heard that throughout the entire 2+ years of war. We can't let Russia win. Otherwise, fill in the blank, all these bad things will happen. Here's what I'm saying is, if you keep going down this path of ignoring all these ground truth realities we keep talking about, not only will Russia win, we'll lose. And I assure you, if you think that it was bad to let Putin win, meaning have a negotiated settlement where he ends up with territory that he didn't start the war with, and who in the West would argue that that's not a good thing for Russia. But if you say, because I don't want that one, I'm going to keep fighting, that implies that you think you can win. Right. But if the path is that you can't, then the likely outcome is that you will lose even more. And that's where it's going to really cut our credibility. Because imagine if NATO, the whole force, is shown to have been unable to stop Russia from winning. Now then our credibility is really damaged, far worse than having a negotiated settlement.
Danny, do you feel that credibility, would that show weakness on the international stage? Would that just make NATO and the United States look completely useless?
If we lose, it will. If we do the right thing, the rational thing, and say, all right, we're going to recognize reality and we're going to stop doing things that are dumb, that are going to potentially lead to failure. Let's try to bring this to an end right now. Then it's going to look bad because it took us 2.5 years to get to someplace we could have done before the war. But at least people go, all right, well, they finally got there. And they do have a lot of power. They do have, strong NATO, air defenses, air power, naval power, all kinds of things. All that's still intact. So you still have deterrence there. Russia doesn't have the capacity to go further. So it'll be embarrassing. But at the end of the day, all the power remains intact. But if you don't do that and Russia ends up winning, now then people will, even in the West, will start saying, what good is NATO? And then you have the real chance that it could actually fall apart.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. Danny, I'm going to have one final question as we wrap up today's interview. First of all, I want to, again, thank you for your time and your insights. It's fantastic. We're going to keep getting you on the show and breaking down these. I just love chatting with you about this stuff. But do you think that now looking at a little bit more broader picture, looking at that we have a conflict that we're very much involved in Ukraine, we continue to fund Israel in this war that does not seem to be ending anytime soon as well, the war in Gaza. We've got, Africa's on fire right now. We've got, the Taliban's back in control in Afghanistan. You've got the U.S. really wanting to now stir up a hornet's nest with China. What is your kind of feelings right now as we're also, the other one is the X factor, the 2024 election? What is your feeling for the nation of America right now? The United States, I should say.
Yeah. I actually had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on my show recently, and I asked him nearly that same question. And, as someone who was in the diplomatic corps for, I think, like 40-something years of his life at some of the highest levels, he's just anguished by what he sees. And even though I haven't been in the diplomatic corps, I'm anguished by what I see too. And you really painted that global picture pretty starkly and unpleasantly accurate in that we keep making lots of mistakes and going down past it, just can't succeed. And at some point we could have a break to where, whether it's the Ukraine side loses or God forbid if we ever, provoke China into a fight that I don't think we can even win in the Indo-Pacific or any of these other things, we keep undercutting our own credibility because right now we are throwing away centuries of credibility and power built up by the United States by making so many foolish decisions such that it's not just whether China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran are going to do something nefarious diplomatically or militarily, but it's like even in the global South, even in the West, people are starting to look already at the United States like, what is wrong with you guys? You keep doing dumb things. That means that they're not going to listen to us. They're not going to moderate their behavior. They're not going to do things that ultimately would be in our advantage. And that's a very dangerous place to get in because if people start turning their back on you, especially from inside, then the risk that others on the outside start doing stuff rises. And that's bad for everybody.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Danny, that's why we talk about these things, because we want to spread more public knowledge about this, and hopefully, interviews like this and YouTube channels like ours can, help educate the public and really, try to make a difference. I mean, we're going to go to the polls in November. I don't think we have a good choice with both candidates. I mean, it wouldn't be my ideal choice either of them, but yet that's where we are. So we're going to have to do the best that we can and see, hopefully just pray for better leadership and some sound, cool heads to prevail and some better strategic thinking. So I want to thank you again. Thank you for your time. And everybody, I'm going to also put a link down to Danny's YouTube channel. It's growing very fast. He's doing a great job. Danny, congrats on the growth of your channel. We're going to put a link down to that in the description down below. And everyone, thank you for your amazing support, making it all the way to this point of the video. And we can't wait to share more interviews like this with you very soon.